Okay, anyway, I have a Photoshop icon. I placed it in my toolbar down at the bottom. Wherever that icon is, it could be in your applications folder. You just double click that, or wherever your Photoshop icon is, you can just drag a file onto that and it will open it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry it's not showing that. I'll figure that out. Okay, and you can see my toolbar, this one right here, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, hopefully, I'm gonna talk about this real quick because I have a feeling it's gonna show up in the recording playback, so I'll have to futz with that later. Okay, so let's just look at these tools real quick. I'm just gonna go over really basic ones. I'm not gonna go into ones that we're gonna go into later, okay? Because I wanna keep this very simple in the beginning. This one right here is your move tool. That's exactly what it is, okay? It's just used to move things around. So if and I'll show you layers here in a minute. If I put a shape here, and I want to move it, that's what that lets me do. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Now, let's not worry about the artboard. And then if you notice any tool here that has a little arrow right there to the right at the bottom, if I click and hold that, it'll have multiple tools in there. And we'll talk a little bit later about how you can set up your tools specifically to the way you like them, okay? But I don't want to get into that yet. Then right here is your Marquee Tools, and these are just what they say. It's a rectangular tool, so I can do that. For some reason it's lagging, hang on. It's really weird. Anyway, so it gives me that. If I hold the shift, it will give me a square. If I don't hold the shift, I can just move it around however I want. Same thing with the circle. It'll give me a perfect circle if I hold shift, and if I don't, I can squash it, stretch it, whatever I want to do. Okay. Now, again, all this stuff it'll be in the video. Don't worry about it. Also, don't worry about trying to remember the tool I'm talking about right now because we're going to start using them at some point. Okay. So don't worry too much about it yet. I'm just kind of touching on it. This is your Lasso Tools. And these are just selection tools. So this one's a free one. You can see I can just make a free line. And then it makes, and if you notice the marching ants around it, that's just telling you it's a selection, okay? I'm gonna go Command or Control D, and that will deselect it, okay? Okay, so that one just makes a random free selection. This one right here, the Polygon Lasso tool, everywhere I click, it makes a corner. I don't know why my computer's flashing like that. It's been doing that for a while. And it just makes this sharp-edged selection. I'm going to go Control or Command D to deselect it. This one I'm not going to worry about yet, object selection or this one. This is your magic wand tool. So what this does is it just selects stuff based on whatever I pick. It will select similar pixels. Does that make sense? You know, so color, value. If it was black and white, it'd be more value. And then what we're going to find out later on is all these tools, if you notice as I click them, this information right up here in my control bar right there is going to change. So what that's going to do is it's going to give me really common things I might need for that tool, parameters around that tool as I change them. They're just really common things that you'll use. Now, if I want to go further with that, like if I'm using this type tool and I go, well, it's not what I want is not here. Under Windows, you'll get all your palettes. Okay. So what that is, so let's go to character, that's type. It will give me a specific palette for that tool with all the tools in it that, you know, expanded tool set that's not all in the control bar. The control bar is basically stuff that's just quick that you're probably going to use all the time. Does that make sense? Windows are really your palettes. So just forget the word window. Photoshop calls it window. It's actually, that's all your palettes, okay? And your palettes are just very specific tool sets for that particular tool, okay? Now, this window, when you're working, you can end up with all these windows all over the place, okay? You don't want to do that. So if you look over here to the right here, there's this little well, and I can take this and I can just lock it into this little well right there. And then I can just click it and it'll pop out and give me a, it just keeps it clean and neat, okay? And tomorrow we'll talk about making a custom workspace and all that. I don't want to jump into that yet. It's a lot better to work clean and smart, and then I can arrange these tools however I want just by moving them around, okay? So I'm just pulling that over. You'll see in the video why I'm doing that, okay? So that's the well right there. And then let's keep going through these. This is your crop tool. Let me deselect this. By the way, magic wand tool, very rarely useful, okay? Let's go to the crop tool and click on here. Then I can just grab edges and crop my image, okay? Oh, by the way, I'll get into that later. This is your eyedropper tool. That's just gonna select color. So if you notice, this little foreground swatch changed to that color. Now, this foreground background thing, for the most part, the color you're actively using is the foreground color, okay? When I go to fill something, I can either tell it to fill with the foreground color or the background color, okay? That will make more sense as we move forward if you're not used to that. I thought that was totally weird when I learned Photoshop. I don't know why. So it'll make sense as we move along. But if you notice the eyedropper tool, anywhere I pick, I can sample a color, okay? Which obviously comes in really handy for a lot of stuff. It really comes in handy for digital painting, you know, so I can go in here and grab reference, and then I can start my color by just picking samples out of, you know, some photo reference or something like that, okay? Here's your paintbrush, which is just what it says. Now it's painting, okay? I don't know why it's doing that whiteout thing, but you can see what it does. It just paints, okay?
How do we undo something?
Oh, Command Z. And also right here under window again, which is your palettes, I can go to history, and there's this window, and it gives me every move I've made right here, okay? So I could go back, and I can go all the way back to when I opened it right here. And you can see it erased everything out. Then if I go back down, I can add those things back in. But if you notice, I'm adding the whole history leading up to it also, okay? So I'm gonna go back to just plain. So your brush, oh, by the way, your brush tool right up here under your control bar right there is where you can select your different brushes, okay? We're gonna really get into brushes. And again, everything I'm talking about right now, I'm just overviewing. Don't get too hung up about remembering all of it. So I can pick different brushes. I tend to like this one. That's my drawing brush. And we got all these, I've got a lot of different brushes in here for painting and things like that, okay? But I can also, right here, I can make the size of the brush bigger, okay? I can also, I can't here, it's whited out, or it's grayed out. I can also make the brush harder or softer. So this brush is gonna have a harder edge, you can see that. Then I'm gonna take it and take the hardness all the way the other way, and it'll be a softer edge, okay? And here's the other thing, because we're gonna start using a simple tool today. A lot of your tools, like today, we're gonna play around with the clone stamping tool a little bit. They all, most of them, not all of them, but most of them behave like a brush, okay? So like when I'm using, and I'll show you this in a little bit, when I'm using the clone tool, I usually use a very soft edge brush. Otherwise, it's gonna be very obvious that I'm cloning, and I don't want that. I also usually, and if you notice right here, under your brush bar up here, right here under opacity, I can lower the opacity of my brush. So if I lower it way down, you can see, you can barely see it. I'm putting it over that building right there. So you can barely see it because I've lowered the opacity of the brush, okay? So like when I'm doing something like what we're gonna do today, I usually start with a lower opacity brush because I really wanna build it up, okay? And you'll see what I'm talking about in a little bit. This is the clone stamping tool, which we'll start playing around with today. So if I If I hold Option, I go over a section where I want to sample from. You see it makes that little target or whatever. And then I can go over here and I can start to paint that somewhere else. That's annoying, it's doing that. And I can start to paint that in somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
It's a really useful tool, and all these tools, again, they're really useful. But, and we'll get, you know, as we expand our understanding of the tool sets and all that sort of thing, it'll make more sense. But they're all, people don't get what people do and they go, oh, whenever I need to do that, I just go to clone stamp tool. And then you look at it and you go, it looks clone stamp. Like whenever you're doing these things in any of these programs, you want to, you don't want people to know to look at it and see your technique or whatever, or your lack of technique. You don't want to see that. You want it all to be seamless, okay? This also has pattern stamp tool, which we'll get into later. I'm not worried about this. Your eraser tool is just what it says. It erases stuff out. Now, let's talk about this real quick. When Illustrator, when Photoshop opens a file, and let's say in this case, it's a JPEG, okay? So a JPEG cannot exist as a layered file, and our layers are right here. I'm gonna pull this over in case the video does weird stuff. This is our layers palette, okay? If you notice this layer right here, it's called background and it has a lock on it. That's because JPEGs cannot exist, they have to be flat. They cannot have multiple layers, okay? So if I click this little, so what that means is also, and this will make sense hopefully very quickly. If you notice when I erased with my eraser, if you notice it didn't erase, it gave me orange, okay? The reason for that is this background swatch right here is orange. So there's a foreground color and a background color. And because this, I don't have a layer underneath this, it just goes, well, I'm gonna fill it with a background color, okay? Again, this will make more sense as we move through it. If I unlock this layer, so I just clicked it and I unlocked it. Now you notice it became layer 0. It just became, that's what it names it. It'll name it layer 1, layer 2, layer 0, whatever. Now, if I erase it, let's get a little bigger brush here, or eraser. It erased, and now it erased it. Okay, so what it's telling you whenever you see that little grid is that you're actually looking at transparency. So what that's telling you is like, okay, you have a layer here and nothing underneath it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It does? Okay. Because it made no sense to me when I was learning Photoshop. So whenever you see that grid, it means you have transparency. Whenever you're erasing and it goes to a color, it probably means that you're on a flattened image. And the background layer, the reason it's locked like that is that's what it does when it's a flat image like that and you have a background layer, usually in like a JPEG. So if I make another layer here, I can just click this and make another layer, or I can take a layer and I can drag it onto the plus and I can duplicate the layer. So there's our eraser. We just talked about that. I don't know why it's doing that. I gotta look that up. Gradient tool. I mean, just does what it says. Let's get a better color here. So over here in my well, which is just my palettes, which lives under Windows, I'm gonna grab blue and let's grab red. So now you can see my foreground swatch switch to red. So what the gradient tool does is exactly what it says. It just makes gradients. So I'm going to grab this. Now under here, it has our controls here. I don't want to get too far into that because we're going to do gradients pretty quick. So I'll just go over it then. But it'll make a gradient. Okay, gradient. Smudge tool does exactly what it says. It's something I use a lot. It smudges. Let's get back down there. So I just smudged that out. So it does exactly what it says. Then we got Sharpened Smudge tool. Blur tool does exactly what it says. It'll just blur a section that I paint. You can see it blurred it out a little bit. And now we'll try and figure out today what's going on with that flash thing. I don't know what that is. Sponge tool. just saturates or desaturates things. So if I go up here and I put it under saturate and I put it up to 100, it'll really saturate that little area that I'm covering over right there. Way too much there. Or I can put it on desaturate and it'll desaturate that area. Very specific. I'm just painting. And again, that tool, I can use my brush setting tools. I can make a soft edge. I can lower the opacity. I can lower the strength just to what I need. Okay. Burn tool just makes things darker, just like that. Got to be really careful with the burn tool because you can see it makes everything really dirty. Sometimes it'll work pretty good. Be careful with that. A lot of students, they just go in, oh, it's one needs to be darker, and they go in with the burn tool and it just looks gross. It just throws black into it and it doesn't look very nice. Dodge tool does the opposite, just makes things lighter. Can also have the same problem where it's sort of devoid of color and just adds a bunch of light. Sometimes it's great. Okay, today we'll talk a little bit about the pen tool. This is the pen tool. Then it has these other things. Don't worry about these yet. Other than we're going to do this corner tool and the pen tool today. But if I take this, I can make very specific selections with this. Okay. Now that's not a selection. I'll talk about this in a minute. You have to make it a selection. Right now, all it is a work path. Okay, and that'll make sense when I get into this in a minute. Type tool, just click, makes type. I can type into it. Now, if I click here, I can take my move tool and I can make it bigger and different things like that, okay? Also, if you notice, let's pull this over. You notice right here, it makes a specific type layer, okay? So as soon as you click on something, it won't put it in the layer you're on. It will put it on its own layer. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because type is its own animal, okay? And until I make this not type, this is called live type right now. What live type means is that I can adjust it. I can change the type. I can make it bigger, smaller, blah, blah, blah. I can do all these things to it. But then there's also tools in Photoshop where Photoshop might go, well, you can't do that while it's live type. And then I'd have to do something called rasterizing the type. And then once I rasterize it, that type really can't be manipulated anymore the way it was. It can be manipulated in a different way, okay? Which will make sense when we get to it. So I'm going to drag this down to my trash can icon right here and throw it away. And then we have, right next to that, we have our, oh, by the way, there's other type tools in here, vertical type tool. We'll get into those a little later. You have your white arrow tool and your black arrow tool. Your black arrow tool is going to select, when we start getting into paths, it's going to select the whole path. And when you use the white arrow tool, it will only select points so I can manipulate the path. I will go into that in a minute. This is just a shape making tool. We'll worry about that later. This is your hand tool. So if I have this and I want to move this around. Now, another thing, if I'm on another tool and I want to do that, I can just hold the space bar to quickly access that tool, right? It comes in handy. By the way, when you have this like that, if you notice, it won't move it. It just locks it into the window. It's usually when it's like that that I can manipulate it around. And then our zoom tool, just drag it. You either drag it towards you or away from you and it'll do one or the other. Now you can also do that just by going Control- or Control+ will zoom in and out. I think I tend to use that more than the other one. And then right here where these three little dots are, I can go to Edit Toolbar and I can add things in. We'll get into that probably by the end of the week. And we can customize our toolbar, okay? So under Image and then Mode right here, we have RGB color and we have all these different ideas, right? But I just want to talk about, that's grayscale, just is what it is, turns it into a grayscale image. This is RGB color and then this is CMYK color. For the purposes of this class, those are the two that are important, okay? Now, RGB for most part means screen, If I'm making something for the web or whatever, things like that, that's RGB, and that's a color space, okay? So it's red, green, blue, okay? If I'm making it for print, it's CMYK, okay? Which is under image, mode, CMYK, okay? The reason, and I'll just explain this real quick. The reason it's CMYK is when the printer prints something, they print it what's called 4-color process, and they generate a cyan plate, a yellow plate, a magenta plate, and a black plate. That's what CMYK means. Okay, the K is black. So that's how you're breaking your color space down, okay, for the printer. Okay, this is important because if you get a job, here's another thing I want to say real quick. We have a print technology department. If you're a graphic designer, I'd even say if you're an illustrator, but especially if you're a graphic designer, you have to take a print technology class, probably production or whatever they call it over there, to learn how what you're doing relates to the printer. Because if you get a job for print, like a package design, you have to know how to set that up for print. Because if you don't, they're going to fire you. Does that make sense? And if I'm doing things for like the web, it's going to probably be 72 DPI, dots per inch or whatever. That's a small size, but it works for the screen. Okay, that's what the screen can see. I'm not going to send somebody, if I was creating something for the web or whatever, you know, some screen thing like that, I'm not going to send them like a 600 DPI CMYK file. That's not what they need. What you're telegraphing to somebody when you do that is, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, that's why I'm mentioning this, okay? If it's for screen, it's probably gonna be 72 DPI. And I might make it oversized as long as it's ratioed correctly, but I might make it oversized so if they wanna go a little bigger. Because when you make something if I make something 3x5, 72 DPI, if they put it 6x5 or whatever, 6x7, it will pixelate, okay? Because it can't go any bigger than that size, okay? If I'm sending it to a printer, I'm going to send it in CMYK at probably 300. 300's the common one, okay? Once in a while, somebody will want something higher res, like 600. It's usually 300. So for the purposes in here, just to get thinking about this, print is CMYK, usually 300 DPI, and web is RGB, usually 72. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now,
Yeah.
for the purposes of this class, we'll mostly work 72 DPI. Okay. And here's one other thing real quick. If you're working in other classes or even in this class, okay, and you're like, let's say, because when I used to get creative projects in a class, I used to always think, I'm going to try and make a portfolio piece. Okay. If it was a creative project. If I was doing that as a student now, I would probably, if I go, hey, this might be a portfolio piece, I might do it at 300. Only because I don't know what I might use that for. I might want to be able to go bigger with it. I want, you know, for the purposes of what I'm going to want though, it's 72, okay? But if you think it's something could be a portfolio piece or something, you might want to do 300. We're going to use a lot of found images off the internet and stuff like that. They tend to be 72 because they're web images. So you can't go to, and by the way, you can't take a 72 DPI image and go, well, I want to make it 300 DPI. That doesn't work. It has to be 300 DPI. Does that make sense? Under edit, and I'm going to drop down here under edit, I can go fill, okay? And it gives me the option to go foreground or background color. So I'm going to go foreground color, and it fills it with this foreground color right here. Now, if I go back there and I go fill, background color, it will fill it with a background color, okay? That's the two ways you can fill. And by the way, the hotkeys for that are Option, Delete, give me the foreground color, or I think it's Command. Yeah, Command, Delete, and that will give me the background color. But when you're drawing or whatever, like if I do that and I have an opacity low, it's working off the foreground color. Okay, so if you want to use a color for your brush, you know, if you're going to sample something or go pick a swatch or whatever, you're going to want to, it's going to use your foreground color. Okay, So unless you tell it specifically to use the background color, it's usually working off the foreground color. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at this, what we want to do today. I'm going to go right here to my, so what we're going to do here is we're going to play a little bit around with the selection tools, specifically our Polygon Lasso tool and our pin tool a little bit. Actually, I might do the pin tool tomorrow, actually. I think I probably will. I just want to do something very simple today. And then we're going to play around with our clone stamp tool. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm going to take right now, see, I took this all the way back to the beginning. So if you look, it's locked. I don't want this locked. So I'm going to come into my layers palette right here. I'm going to pull this over just in case the video is doing that weird stuff. And I'm going to unlock this. So now it's unlocked, and you can name this what you want. I'm going to say ORI, which means original to me. So that's the original layer. And then I'm going to take my corner tool, which is not what I would usually use for this. And I'll talk a little bit more about this probably tomorrow. And I'm just going to take a building here. In this case, I'm going to take this one. And if you notice, I can just click. This is a fairly geometric shape. And I'm going to click all the way down here. Now, normally I wouldn't do a sloppy selection like that. I'd select all those little indentations on the building. And I'm just going to select this part here. It's fine for this. Now I'm going to go all the way up here. And now you can see it's got marching ants around it, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so just remember, whenever it has a marching ants around it, it's a selection, okay? And now I'm going to go, let's do this. Let's go. So we all know cut and paste, right? So we can I could either copy this, go Command C, and then go Command V. And it's going to give me this option. I can post it as a smart object, which we'll talk about later, as a path shape later. We don't care about any of that. We just want to post it as pixels. So I'm going to say OK. Okay. So it pasted it right on top of itself. Okay. So there's my building. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And if you notice, by the way, this is also important. Right here on the control bar under my move tool right here, I've got auto select selected. The reason I do that is if you notice, look at my layer palette right here, right there. Okay. If I click the background, if I touch on it, see how it goes to the background? Or if I click my building, it selects the building. So I like to have auto select layer on. What that means is if I touch something, it takes me to that layer. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
If I don't have that, to me, it's a pain in the ass. I know some people who don't like using that, and I never understand why, okay? So I'm gonna click it, and then I'm just gonna hit delete. Now I'm gonna go back and get my selection again, see if I can just do that with my, let's see if I can just do it with my Command Z. Yep, there it is. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do instead is I'm gonna go Command X, which is cut. So I cut it this time because I don't want it there. And I'm gonna go Command V. So now, if you notice, what we're basically looking at here is a piece of paper where we cut a stencil out. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna do two things. I'll deal with this in a minute. I wanna come in here. And they didn't used to have this function, but they do now, apparently. So if you look up here in my toolbar right here, because normally I don't start talking about this until a little later, but I think we can just start talking about it right away. There, you can work in Photoshop destructively or non-destructively. Destructively means I'm working on the layer, the original layer, and whatever I'm doing to that layer, it's sort of permanent. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know, I can Command Z out of it, but if I open that back up tomorrow and I did all this stuff on this original layer, that's it, it's set in stone, I can't change it. So a lot of the tools in Illustrator now, and it seems like we're doing it more and more, are set up to work non-destructively, okay? So the clone stamp tool used to only work on the original layer, which means it was destructive, okay? But now if you look at it, I just made a new layer. Actually, no, I haven't. So let's make a new layer, boom, okay? So I just click my little plus, and I made a new layer. I'm going to call this clone. And I'm going to come over here now, and I should be, and if you notice right here under my tool sets, or the tool set, the control bar for this tool, it says current and below, or current layer, or all layers. Okay, I just want to go current and below, which means I'm working on the layer I'm working on and the one below it. And the one below it needs to be, let's get rid of this one. Okay. No, I'm going to turn this one off. I'm going to put this one for now. I'm going to put it right here. So now I'm going to go back to my clone layer. And what it should do now is just, I should be able to just work on this layer non-destructively. So let's go here. I want to select this sky right here by holding Option and then click. And of course, it's doing that weird whiteout thing. And I'm going to build this back, the sky back in here. Oops. See where I screwed up right there? I picked up part of the building. So here's the other thing it's doing. Usually gives a little X up here that shows you I'm stamping here, but I'm sampling from here. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you guys on your computer, something's whacked out about my computer. I think I'm gonna have to reload it all. It'll give you that. So what I want to do here by tomorrow is I want to get all this filled in so it looks okay. Where I refill in this area. And I'm just grabbing it from over here. Now, if you notice, and it's not going to be perfect, you guys, or maybe it is, I don't know. Now, here's the other thing it starts to screw up when you're using the clone stamp tool. I wouldn't worry about it too much for this exercise. See how it's repeating the clouds right here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't like that because it's going to tell the viewer that they're going to know that I stamped it and I cloned it. For the purposes of this, I'm not that worried about it, but be aware of it because, again, you don't want to do that. The clone stamp tool is another thing that can look really hideous if you don't use it right. But it can also look great if you do use it right. And there's a million ways to do this, and I'll show you other ways to do it. I don't really care about, just fill this stuff in as well as you can. I don't care which building you take out, by the way. You can take out any of these buildings. Does that make sense? Or I only want one, and then I want where it was replaced. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Now, let's say that I filled that all in. The other thing I want you to do is, now look at here though. I can turn off my clone stamp layer because I'm working non-destructively. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Now, what it used to be is it'd be on the same layer, it'd be like this. I'm gonna combine these two layers, and it would be one layer, and it would just be I'm stuck with this. Luckily, it's not like that anymore. And then I'm gonna go. So I'm gonna take this layer, which is I'm gonna mark this now. I'm gonna double click it and go building. And then I'm going to put this building, I'm not going to worry about the perspective too much. I'm going to put this building, and here's another thing I can do here, you guys. In my window or my layers palette, right here, now we've got overlays, we'll talk about those later, probably tomorrow. And then we've got opacity. So I'm going to take this building layer, and I'm going to turn the opacity down. And then I'm going to go, let's move it over where it makes at least a little bit of sense. Yeah, let's put it there. And I'm going to bring the opacity down a little more. And then I'm going to take my Polygon Lasso tool and I'm going to make another selection right here. It's going to be a sloppy selection. It'll be as sloppy as me. And then down here doesn't matter. And then I'm going to come up here and close that selection. Then I'm just going to go delete. And now I'm going to bring my opacity back up. And now we got a building back there. Okay, and now I could also probably even lower the opacity a little bit, make it feel like it's a little more back there. I don't want the sky to start showing through and all that, but it's a little better. So ideally what I should have here is I should have this gone and filled in, or whatever building you want to get rid of. And then this other building put somewhere into this environment. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes.
I think that's enough for the first day. I don't want to get too crazy because tomorrow I want to go into the pen tool, okay, and just do a simple pen tool selection. Or I can start going over that right now if you guys want to go over that.
Can you repeat when you selected the building in the first place, what action was used to get it to erase it or remove it?
I went to Polygon Lasso tool, which I'm using right now. I selected it, which the reason I'm using this right now, again, I would never make a selection like this, but right now we're just getting into selection, so it's fine. I would use the pen tool for this, and which we're going to talk about probably tomorrow. And I'm going to select this whole building. Let's just select this page. And now I close the selection. There's the marching ants. I have to be on the original layer, which isn't this layer, it's this layer. So I got to jump back down to here. I got to be on the original layer right here. And I'm going to go Command X and then Command V. And what it'll do when I do Command V, if you notice, is it pops it on its own layer, which is useful.
Command V is in vector or?
Yeah, paste, cut and
V.
paste. Right, so it's Command C's cut, or Command C's copy, Command V's paste, Command X is cut, which means it's gonna completely put it in your clipboard, but take it off of that image, okay? So sometimes I don't wanna just cut it, I wanna just copy it. But in this case, I wanna cut it because I want it gone. And I want it on another layer, okay? Now I can turn that layer off, and then that's what I would fill. Make sense?
Yeah.
And then I'm gonna go, and then let's just go over this real quick too. I'm gonna put another layer over it. So I'm working non-destructively. Make sure that up here in my control bar, when I grab the clone stamp tool right here, and if you notice my opacity is on 64 because I don't want it full blast. And then current and below. So now I could also go all layers. I could also do that too, but in this case, I want to control it a little more. So I want to have one layer here, and then my layer underneath it that I'm working on. So I'm going current and below. Does that make sense? Current and below is when we're working non-destructively. Current and below means I'm working on, not on the original layer, I'm working on a layer above it, which means I can get rid of it, I can turn it off and on, I can alter it, I can do all sorts of things not relating to the original layer, which we want to do as much as possible when we're working in Photoshop, is work non-destructively where we can undo things that we're doing. Does that make sense?
So you want us to like always have it selected when we're working?
We want to always work non-destructively, okay? And you're going to see different ways of it. Like later on, we'll get into down here. Let me move this over. Down here, and don't worry about this yet, but I'm just going to mention it. Down here in my, not there, right here, is my adjustment layer. So if I go here, I can use all these tools non-destructively, and it will create an adjustment layer. And not, I can go back the next day and go, oh my God, that's way oversaturated, and I can change it, or I can get rid of it and start over, okay? I don't want to alter the original file if I can avoid that. What you're gonna want to do, you want to save your layered file, okay? So you're gonna save that. If I save this, comes up, save on your computer. Okay, save into iCloud documents. They have their own cloud. That's what that is, okay? I'm gonna say save on my computer. And if you notice, it's a PSD. That's what I want to save it as. That's native Photoshop, okay? So I'm gonna go save. Now I'm going to go up here and go save as. And I'm going to go JPEG. That's what you're going to give me. And I'm going to go, let's just do this. Let's go JPEG F for final, okay? And I'm going to say, okay. So it gives me this. I can go small file, large file, maximum. I don't know why anybody would want to use a low quality file. It makes no sense to me. And I'm going to say, okay. Now, when I go down wherever I put it, here, and here it is, Photoshop F. There it is. And I'm gonna go, I'm gonna see how big this is. And that's how big it is, I think. Under view up here, I can go 100%. And there it is. Okay, it's 100%. So that's fine. It's not too big or anything like that. And I just go, okay, that's fine. Also, by the way, if I go up in my toolbar or my file menu up here under image, I can go right here to image size. And it will give me my information. This is 72 DPI. It's 27 by 18 inches. I could change that to pixels. It's 2000 by 1336 pixels. And it's into centimeters, millimeters, points, all that stuff, okay? I like to just be under, it's a percent, that's weird. Inches. So 72, it's that big. And I'm gonna hit okay, and that's fine. You can submit that, but that's what you'll submit to me. Does that make sense? All right, you guys, I'll see you in the morning, yes?